Hey, welcome back. Do something a little different today. I'm going to talk about saddle care because, well, we've actually run into a few problems with this particular saddle, and so I just thought, what the heck? It's a good opportunity to talk about it. And I'm going to show you a few things on this saddle that, well, problems that we've run into and how to prevent them, because even in my training I've said it's much easier to prevent problems than it is to fix them. So we're going to talk about this saddle, things that could have been done to prevent the problems that we're having, and what I'm doing about them. Now, this is a particularly good quality saddle. To replace it, I wouldn't even want to venture a guess, but probably about $3,000 new, if you could buy it. They don't make them anymore. But overall, it's actually in pretty good shape. So it's worth putting some effort into. Well, actually, considering that your saddle is probably your biggest single investment, other than the horse itself, possibly. Depends how much you paid for the horse, too. Your saddle is going to be, as far as your tack goes, it is going to easily be the single largest investment that you're going to make. And so you're going to want to take care of it so that it lasts. And if you do take care of it properly, it's probably going to last your lifetime. So I'm going to run through a few things that you can do to make your saddle last longer, and things that, well, weren't done right with this one by somebody previously that is causing the problems I'm having at the moment. Now, like I said, this is a good quality saddle. It's got very thick leather on it. It's well put together and everything. It even has real lambskin fleece on the bottom side of it here, and which actually causes an additional problem in a way, because what happened was this saddle was not properly stored for a period of time. I don't know how long, when, any of that stuff, but it was clearly stored in a damp location. And that's not uncommon, particularly if you live in a rural area where your tack gets tossed into the barn or something like that that's not heated, has a dirt floor, tends to be a little damp. Leather is prone to molding. Now, I've already cleaned this one up a bit, so I can't show you all that stuff. But what I can actually do is tell you what I did and how to prevent it, because on closer examination, once I got it out in the daylight and started taking a closer look at it, I discovered that the mold was actually fairly extensive. It was actually worse than I initially anticipated, although it wasn't damaging. So I'm lucky in that respect. We caught it in time before it did any damage to the saddle, so that we can definitely save this one. Unfortunately, the one downside, one thing I can't do anything about, is the smell. For those of you that are not familiar with the problems of mold and mildew, and I'm not going to get into the biology of that stuff, because mildew is actually a type of mold, but it doesn't matter. When it gets moldy, it tends to get stinky, and this saddle is stinky. And unfortunately, although I've managed to minimize it, I don't think I'm ever going to get rid of that smell. It's something we're going to have to live with. But considering what this saddle is worth and what I paid for it, and the fact that it is in fact the most comfortable saddle I've ever sat on, I'm going to go with it. I'm going to put up with the smell. But the mold itself, we had to do something about, because left unchecked, it will build up and it will become quite damaging to the leather. So first thing first, prevent the mold in the first place. Be very careful where you store your tack. Make sure there's some air movement, there's some ventilation, it's not a damp location. You know, I know a lot of people don't want this kind of stuff, especially something this big in their house. Takes up space, looks ugly, whatever, compared to the household decor. I wouldn't care, it wouldn't bother me, but considering what this one smells like now, I wouldn't want it in my house. Actually, I did have it in the house last night to dry it out. Long story, it got rained on. Well, anyhow, so the best thing you can do is storage. Is, you know, keep it away from moisture, but the other thing that you can do is a regular cleaning, because if you keep it clean, there's less places for the moisture to accumulate, and therefore less places for the mold to grow. And that can be done. Now, a lot of people say, oh, don't get leather wet. Well, you're not getting it wet. It's not like you're hosing it down. Okay? But take a damp rag. Now, this is the safest way, absolute safest way to get rid of your dust, is just a damp rag, so that the dust will stick to the rag, not enough to get the saddle wet. Just a damp rag, wring it out tight as best you can. And, I've heard people recommend the microfiber cloths, that type of thing. For me, because I live out of town, that would be extremely expensive to go get one of those. If I wanted to drive into the city just to go pick up one of those, it ended up being pretty expensive, so I didn't bother. I just used what I had, which was just ordinary old, actually it was a T-top. But it was the type of fabric that would pick up the dust and not drop moisture, that sort of thing. And what you do is you get in between all the layers. Under the skirting, under the fenders, in the cracks and corners, because there's a lot of places, even after a thorough cleaning, I still can't, there's still a little bit of dirt in some of these little cracks and corners, unfortunately, that I just couldn't get out. And I was as thorough as possible with that stuff, but unfortunately, we didn't get it all. But you can, if you do it on a regular basis and around the conchos and stuff, it's very difficult to get in there. And a lot of people neglect that stuff, but that is exactly the kind of place where the dust will accumulate, therefore it'll hold moisture and the mold will grow. Don't want that. So take the time, a little toothbrush or something, even if you have to get in there and brush out the dust that accumulates in there. A damp cloth over the whole thing, in between all the layers. Keep it clean. That really helps. Very important, keep your saddle clean. That's one of the things you can do. Another problem we run into with this one, I noticed that I don't think it had been cleaned or treated from the day it was new, unfortunately, which is really a shame, because this was a very good saddle when it was new. It was one of the better ones you could buy at the time. Even now, it's still a pretty good saddle, and it makes me a little sad that somebody didn't take better care of it. But, well, there lost my gain. Like I said, I got a pretty decent deal on it, so I'm not going to complain too much. I have to put some effort into caring for this thing. It needs a little extra care because of the fact it's been neglected for years. We have to put a little effort into making sure that we do what needs to be done. Now, the first thing I had to do was damp cloth, wipe it all down as good as I could, get rid of all the dust. And the next step is I had to get rid of the mold. Well, short of completely taking it apart to do a thorough job, unfortunately, that's almost what this one needed, but I did manage to get rid of most of it, I think. I think we got rid of just about all of it. And I'm going to talk about that because it hides. That stuff hides. Now, I'm going to make a few suggestions. I'll tell you what I used, and I'll tell you what a few people recommend, but do your own homework. I don't want to be responsible for you wrecking your saddle, so I'm not going to recommend any one way of doing it, or at least as far as products go that you use, because there's many different ways it can be done, different combinations of products. Unfortunately, when I was doing my research, a lot of the websites that I came up with were actually promoting particular products or groups of products, and that's not particularly helpful because they aren't necessarily the best one. One of the things that I found really interesting was when it comes to something like saddle soap, which, by the way, not only gets used on saddles, but all kinds of leather products. It's a really good stuff to use, but saddle soap is not a single thing. A saddle soap is generally about a dozen different ingredients, and from one brand to another. I was looking at I was comparing a couple, and out of about a dozen ingredients, they only had one in common. The two products were that different. Out of a dozen ingredients, only one was common between the two brands. So be careful when, saddle soap is not just saddle soap. It's not all the same. It can, depending on the brand, can be very different. but it is one of the products that a lot of people will encourage you using. And although unfortunately, like I said, you're going to have to do some homework and decide for yourself what is the better brand to use. Around here, I couldn't even buy the brand that I wanted because of the fact that I couldn't find a store that had it. I've seen it before. I don't recall where, but I have seen it before. Unfortunately, all the stores that I found that actually had saddle soap all had the same brand, one brand, and it was not one of the highly recommended ones from the research that I did. But we're going to go into that. Okay, for cleaning the mold off, though, that requires a little bit more effort than just the dusting does. Dusting, you got to be pretty thorough. Cleaning the mold, you got to be even more thorough, and that means taking things apart. Well, some stuff anyhow, and I'm going to show you a little bit. Is your stirrup leathers. That's one of the things. Your stirrups and your stirrup leathers is one of the things that requires at least a partial disassembly in order to do a decent cleaning. So first thing we got to do is these little straps here. They're called fender hobbles or stirrup hobbles, depending on who you talk to. There's these little straps on the bottom here. You got to take them off. Now once you get that strap off, you're going to have to turn around and undo the buckle on the back that is used for adjusting. Now in order to return it to where you like it, count the number of holes down that it's in before you take it apart, so that when you go to put it back together, you remember where it is. So now we've completely taken apart, well, not completely actually, but we've taken the stirrups off, and so we've got these two straps apart, so we can actually get in between them for cleaning and all the way around them, you know, because there's lots of little grooves. I see even this one's double layered here. Yours might not be though. That's the quality of this one, is that they really beefed up the leather on this one. But you know, take your time, clean the stirrups themselves, because the moisture from your feet on them, you will get moisture on them, guaranteed. That's going to happen. Can't avoid that. So you want to clean them good. Another one of the things that you got to make sure you dust real good, clean good. I actually didn't clean these super good simply because of the fact that, yeah, my feet are going to be on them again and they're going to get dirty. So unfortunately, it is what it is. Okay, so we don't get crazy with these things, but we did clean them up and we made sure there was no mold on them. So that was one of the things we did. Another thing that we did in order to clean the fenders and the stirrup leathers a little bit better, particularly on the one side, it seemed like the one side of the saddle was exposed to a little more moisture than the other. One side wasn't all that bad. The other side had a lot more mold on it. And it was up in between the layers where these leathers run. Now these leathers go, this is actually, these two pieces are connected. They go all the way up to the tree and back down again. Now you can't actually pull them all the way out, but we don't want to do that because that's a lot of work putting them back in again. But we do want to do a fairly thorough cleaning. So what I did is I pulled the leather down. I left it so I didn't pull it all the way through, so I could still pull it back quite easily. But I pulled it down enough that I could easily get in and clean and expose anything that potentially had mold, mildew, stuff on it that, well, we didn't want. That was going to be a potential problem in the future. And I'll tell you what I used for cleaning is, and it's a product that, well, there's a couple different things that I've found recommended, and some say don't use either one of them, but a 50-50 mix of rubbing alcohol and water. Another one is a 50-50 mix of vinegar and water. Now, I found quite a few websites that recommended either or, and one website actually said don't use either because they're both damaging to the leather. Well, I'm thinking maybe if you use too much, it actually might be. And, well, one thing I did discover, though, and I don't know, maybe you can see it. I don't know if you can or not, but you'll notice where the lettering is here, it's a lot lighter. There was mold in the engraving, in the stamping, where the lettering is on here. And I wanted to get that out, so I used a soft nylon brush and my water alcohol mix, and I scrubbed really good to get into all the little cracks and grooves to get all the mold out, which we did do successfully. Unfortunately, in the process of doing that, we also removed the surface of the leather where it was tanned. So when we oil it, it's probably going to absorb more oil in this area. You can see how much lighter it is in here than it is in other areas. You can see, I don't know how, lighting, I don't know how that's working for you, because I can't even see the monitor on the camera from here, but it is much lighter in this area. And I did that. I actually scrubbed a little too much, I guess, but we had to in order to get rid of the mold, so we're going to live with it. It is what it is. You know, for those of you that are much more concerned about your aesthetics, you might want to be a little more careful, because apparently the tanning, the surface on the leather can be damaged quite easily, and that's a perfect example right there of how easily it can be done. I was not scrubbing hard. I was using a very small, fairly soft brush, but apparently I scrubbed enough that I took that layer off. And so, careful. And that's why I'm not going to recommend. I will say though, one thing I know of, and it's been a common thread in a lot of articles that I've read, is do not use petroleum products like lacquer, thinner, or solvents, or any of that kind of stuff. That definitely will damage your leather. Do not clean it with, well, some people will say very mild soapy water, but I would say stay away from soap altogether, and a lot of people agree with me on that one, because soap can be rather harsh and drying to the leather, and we're trying not to dry it out. We don't want to make things worse, because our final step, which I'm going to do today, is I'm actually going to apply some oil to this leather to make it a little moisture. I'm going to put moisture back into it again. And that's one of the reasons that I don't mind pulling the leathers out like this to show you what I did for cleaning purposes, because of the fact I have to expose all this, or I want to expose all this, so that I can apply a nice coat of oil to it, just to preserve it and make it last a little bit longer. So be careful when you're cleaning, but it is important to clean. And like I said, removing the mold, I'm not going to tell you a particular way of doing it, whether you should be using vinegar and water, alcohol water, or no, just plain water and a soft cloth. I used a cloth very similar to one of these for cleaning off the mold. I actually just, you know, for the most part, I just rubbed it off, except for in the places where there was cracks and grooves like this. I used my little brush, and I would scrub in there. Unfortunately, that's damaging. And for the final care, to keep it moisturized, what I'm going to use is something called neat's foot oil. And it's a fairly common product. Since, like I said, I couldn't get the saddle soap I wanted, so I'm using several other products in between. And I'm going to finish up with neat's foot oil. This is what I'm going to moisturize the leather with. And it's a fairly common product. And for those of you that do not know what neat's foot oil is, neat's actually comes from an Old English term, refers to cattle. So basically, it is cattle foot oil. And more specifically, it's actually derived from, well, basically shin bone down on a cow is where they get this oil from, and not the actual hoof itself or any of the other bones, just shin bone to foot bone, shin bone down. I don't know the exact bones. I don't make this up. I do know something about it. This one, as you can see, it says 100% pure neat's foot oil. I'm not going to say the brand name. I'm pretty sure you can't read it from there. But it's neat's foot oil, 100% pure. And this is what you want. Now, you'll notice it's in a dark container. That's because it needs to be protected from sunlight. because this is 100% pure organic natural stuff, and it will deteriorate. It'll go bad in time if it's left, particularly if it's left in the sun, extremes of temperature or something. I don't know, maybe it says right on it. Well, doesn't say. Okay, but one thing you do not want is when it comes to neat's foot oil, because there's a lot of different brands and there's different kinds that you can get, and some of them will say a neat's foot blend or something like that, and basically what they've done is they've put additives in to stabilize this oil, to preserve it basically as a preservative, to make it last longer. And unfortunately, the downside of that is those chemicals that they put in to stabilize this oil are bad for your leather. And I've read quite a few articles that all say the same thing, that the stabilizers that they put in this neat's foot oil is bad for the leather and will dry it out and make it brittle. So, and I don't think this stuff's any more expensive, if whatever, a couple dollars one way or the other, it really doesn't matter anyhow. We're looking at something worth thousands potentially that you want to look after. So 100% pure, nothing but neat's foot oil. And I would say, depending on how much you use and how many saddles you got, etc., basically if I've got any left over after I'm done, I'm throwing it out, because by the time I use it again, it's probably not going to be any good, because this is pure. It doesn't have the stabilizers in it, the preservatives, or whatever you want to call them. So we're going to use this, and I saw a really good hack one time. A guy was oiling his saddle, and he actually used a small paintbrush to get into in between the layers and the tight spots. Works really well, I thought. Unfortunately, I don't happen to have one handy, so I'm just going to use a small clean rag. This has been washed, and I got a couple pieces cut into small pieces so that I can just, and I also have a little dish that I'm going to put it into. It's actually just an old plastic container that I can throw out when I'm done. I'm going to just dip it, rub it on in a circular motion, nice smooth layers, and then trick with this stuff is after it has dried for a while, wipe off the excess and reapply. Do not put a heavy coat on to start with. Putting on several thin coats is better, but like I said, preventing problems far better than trying to fix problems when they have occurred. It will require some disassembly. If you want to get real ambitious, you might want to take a little more apart than I'm taking apart. But you are going to have to care for your saddle if you want it to last. But if you do look after it, there's a very good chance that saddle is going to last you your life. All you got to do is look after it. Treat it good and it'll treat you good. And considering the price of a saddle, even a mediocre one, they're not a small investment. It's a significant investment. It's worth looking after for maybe $30 worth of products once a year. You can completely go over this thing and clean it and treat it and preserve it, and it's going to last you for a very long time. Now, I'm just going to talk about one more thing on this saddle that is both a good and bad. Is the bottom side of this. Now, all saddles are going to have a fleece of some kind on. So actually, I saw one time and it just had like a felt on it or something. But most of them will have some kind of a fleecy looking stuff. This particular one is the real deal. This is actually lambskin on this one, which is good and bad. It tells you the quality of the saddle. It's a very expensive saddle, or was in its day. And unfortunately, that's also a bad thing too when it comes to the mold, because the fleece underneath it is lambskin, sheepskin, well, whatever. It's an organic material similar to the leather that can grow mold. And I don't even have any idea what it looks like because I can't see it. And that's a bit of a problem because it's got the fleece over top of it, so I can't see the actual sheepskin itself to see what kind of condition it's in, how much mold there is on it or anything. And cleaning it, very, very difficult too. And this leads me to another little tip that I should talk about. Actually, there's a couple things when it comes to the whole mold situation. Now, in the case of this one, what I have done in order to work with it, to deodorize it, because it's really smelly because of the fact that it has been moldy, mildew, whatever you want to call it. What I did was baking soda, just plain old baking soda. It's cheap. If you buy it in a bulk bin, it's not very expensive at all. I sprinkled lots on, rubbed it in, sprinkled some more on, rubbed it in, and then I vacuumed it all out. Now, on the subject of vacuuming your saddle, which is not a bad thing to do, and it is also one way to get off a lot of the excess loose mold too, I recommend, unless you've got a vacuum cleaner with a HEPA filter in it, do it outside, because otherwise you're going to be blowing mold spores all over the place with your vacuum cleaner. You don't want to be doing that because it's not good to breathe. It's not necessarily toxic, but it can be damaging to the lungs, so you don't want that. And well, that brings me to another thing is if you go into the tack room and you happen to discover that some of your tack, whether it's one of your bridles or a saddle or something like that, has some mold on it, do not rub it off in there, because all you're going to do is transfer it to the other tack in the room, and the problem is just going to get worse for everybody involved. Anybody that's got tack in there is going to end up with mold on it, unfortunately. Take it outside. You will notice I am outside. I'm working on this outside. Well, for two reasons. One, because of the mold issue. It's far safer out here. There's a light breeze going on, has been for a couple of days. So any of the mold spores that do come off this thing that I haven't already taken care of, because I've vacuumed this thing several times, and anything that the vacuum didn't get, it's not going to end up on the rest of the tack in the tack room. And around here, there's, I mean, in that particular room, I have 3 saddles myself in there I do not want mold on, well, including this one, which already has mold on it, unfortunately. But I don't want to make the problem any worse, so if you do find some mold on anything, don't wipe it off. Don't touch it until you get outside with it. Take the thing outside. Do it outside. That is the absolute best place to be doing it, outside in the sun. And you know, like I said, the advantage of that is any mold spores that are released in cleaning it off are going to be just blow away in the wind, aren't going to be transferred to other saddles, other bridles, that sort of thing. You're not going to inhale it. And out in the sun, you can see what you're doing a whole lot better, and that's not always a good thing. Okay, it's a good thing. It's a good thing that you can see what you're doing. It's bad what you end up seeing. I discovered that with this one, that as I got it in the sunlight and started taking a closer look at things when I had it up in front of me and started, you know what I mean? With the better lighting, I discovered just how bad things were. But like I said, fortunately, the material that this thing is made out of, very robust leather, and we caught it early enough that the mold hadn't had an opportunity to do any damage. Left unchecked, though, mold can be very, very damaging. And that's one of the reasons you want to do something to stop it, and clean it up, reduce it, prevent it, all that stuff, because left unchecked, mold can do a lot of damage to leather. It can weaken it to the point where stuff starts to break, and it actually becomes dangerous to use your saddle. And you know, that's I mean, if you've watched any number of my videos, I'm always talking about safety, and you know, especially when it comes to things like stirrup leathers and stuff. My goodness, you absolutely do not want that stuff compromised. Even your cinch attachments or girth, if you got an English saddle, most of them are leather, and the D-rings are attached to leather. And if that leather is compromised, that thing's not doing its job anymore, and there is a risk of it breaking. And if it breaks at an inopportune time, It could cause some injuries. So all the more reason to give your saddle a good exam on a regular basis. Take care of it, and it'll take care of you, and you will have many, many happy miles of riding. Have a good day.